Species starred people like Ben Kingsley and Forrest Whitaker, and although not critically acclaimed, the movie made 3 times its budget at the box office. That meant only one thing. Executives were interested in making a sequel, and 2 of those were made, but the original 1995 movie was followed by a comic called Species Human Race. It was a 4-issue comic, which featured a male alien cooked up at another lab, but not by the government. It was a private organization, and Human Race is a story about this creature. So without further ado, let's dive into the 4-issue miniseries. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Issue 1. The story begins at Duburque Chemicals, where a good old shootout was taking place. There was blood, bullets, screams, and swear words. You know, kind of like a modern-day Old Testament. Of course, there was another alien, a member of the species from the original movie, and for those who picked up the comics way after watching the movie and didn't remember what happened, the comic does give a bit of a recap later in the story. Anyway, as you would learn later, Duburque Chemicals was nothing like a regular chemical plant. Something terrible was cooked up here, and that something had escaped from here. This was a week ago, and in present day, we see Dr. Elena Walker from the Center for Disease Control, or the CDC, arriving at the facility to meet with someone named Dr. Erland Naylor. When Naylor greets Walker, he says Miss Walker, but the sharp woman wastes no time in correcting him that it was Dr. Walker. She had come all the way from Atlanta and was visibly annoyed because of it. You see, Walker was among the top brass from the CDC and wasn't happy about being called at such short notice. But she had to, because the request had come from high up, very high up. And just to show that she was not in command or control, Naylor tells her that it was he who requested her presence at the facility. He praises her past work, but also says that such a mind should not be wasted on non-military work. Much like Walker, Naylor also sets the tone of their relationship when he says, "Please pay attention. I have no intention of repeating myself at any point." So it becomes clear from the start that these two were alpha wolves and would often clash against each other through the course of the story. Since Walker was an outsider, Naylor briefs her in. 2 years ago, SETI, or the Center for Extraterrestrial Intelligence radio telescope at Arecibo, received a deep space transmission. The transmission was without doubt extraterrestrial in origin and contained 2 coded messages. The first was a formula for the production of a new form of cheap and easily synthesized methane gas energy. The second message was far more significant, an extraterrestrial DNA code with instructions of how to combine it with its human equivalent. A colleague of Naylor, who he calls an incompetent by the name of Fitch, was put in charge of the project and successfully combined the 2 DNA codes to create a human-alien hybrid, codenamed Syl. Oh, and by the way, Fitch was played by Ben Kingsley in the movie. Moving on, Naylor continues and says that true to form, Fitch allowed the creature to escape, after which it was hunted down and destroyed in the sewers beneath Los Angeles. After that, the project was shut down and all remaining samples of the hybrid were destroyed on executive order, an order that possibly came from the White House itself. However, SETI was not the only radio telescope in the world to pick up the original transmission. The information was still out there and somehow made its way to Duburque Chemicals, a major pharmaceutical manufacturer. Needless to say, Duburque Chemicals created their own hybrid life form, and as we would have expected, failed to contain it. Like any sensible person, Walker asks the reason and rationale behind creating something that has the potential of being too dangerous and too difficult to contain. But like any self-respecting, crazy, and power-hungry military guy, Naylor says, why not? After all, the space program gave us the Teflon microwave ovens and ballpoint pens that work upside down. Who knows what commercial spin-offs a human-alien crossbreed might bring, especially to a company already involved in fertility and gene modification research. Anyway, so Duburque managed to recreate the alien hybrid, but there were 2 significant differences between what Fitch had created and the one created at Duburque Chemicals. The original creature was deliberately engineered to be female, presumably on the mistaken assumption that it would thus be more docile and easier to handle. Of course, Fitch and his friends didn't meet a lot of women, as Preston too pointed out in the movie, but the Duburque scientists made no such distinction, and their hybrid was a male. Fitch used a human ovum to fertilize the DNA combination and grew it into embryo form in a tank in his lab, while the Duburque Chemicals scientists implanted theirs inside a living human, a young woman comatose from a car accident, but with all her normal organ functions still intact. As with the Sill creature, the hybrid fetus developed at an astonishing rate, growing to full term in a matter of days. On the other hand, the child born from the comatose woman also showed rapid growth and attained the features of a 10-year-old child in a matter of 30 days and was named Cal. Up until then, the creature, or the boy named Cal, had shown no unusual properties apart from rapid growth, but all of that changed at 8:43 p.m. a week ago, when a nurse named Joanne DeLillo logged on for duty. Now, this was the first time that Cal had seen a woman, a female of the species. It was something of a revelation for him. After all, he was by this point almost 14 years old, and just like any other overexcited adolescent boy, Cal wanted to mate with this female. His basic instinct had kicked in, and he wanted to reproduce. By the time Naylor and his men arrived, Cal was long gone. And needless to say, if it followed the same pattern as the first one, Cal should be a fully grown man by now. So yeah, the clock was ticking. But Walker was confused about her role in the whole situation because expertise was limited to prevention and control of infectious disease, and she had no idea how to hunt down escaped aliens. Naylor says that that's exactly the point. Contrary to how Fitch saw the creature, Naylor believes that Earth had been invaded, not through an actual alien invasion, but through information. The virus was carried or transmitted to Earth through radio transmission. Naylor believed that the creature's real purpose was to spread like a virus and infect the entire planet. And he had a point. You see, Sill was a female and could birth one creature at a time. But Cal, well, this guy could infect hundreds in a short span of time. Each of these newly born hybrids could further do their thing, and the Earth would be left devoid of humanity in a matter of years. Meanwhile, the first issue comes to a close with Cal visiting a nearby red light area. Cal transforms into his real form, a hideous but spine-chilling creature who attacks one of the two strippers he encounters and impregnates this poor woman, leaving her to a fate worse than death. Its only purpose here was to breed and propagate as many of its own kind as possible, and it had already started. But the shrieks of the women alerted nearby cops, who arrived at the scene. However, the creature was prepared to take a more brutal approach than its relative Sill. Cal attacks the cops, and as they fire on him, he keeps charging. But then, Cal was an intelligent being. Some would say that he possessed superior non-human intelligence. So when more cops arrived at the scene, Cal's fight or flight mode instinct kicked in, and he chose the latter. He assessed the situation and knew that getting outnumbered was not the desirable outcome, so he escaped into the night. Meanwhile, the stripper who had been impregnated gave birth to a new hybrid, and much like Sill and Cal, the newborn wasted no time in killing the paramedics before escaping the ambulance. And the first issue wraps up with Dr. Naylor calling Dr. Walker, informing her that it started. Issue 2. By the time the second issue starts, it had been 48 hours since Cal's escape, which started on Interstate 49, which means that they had to stop him and they had to do it fast. On the other hand, Walker was concerned if Naylor was resenting Walker or if he just hated women in general. On the ground, the authorities learned that Cal took off with someone's blue Chevrolet sedan. On the other hand, a young girl's fate was about to be intertwined with the madness called Cal. The girl, Tina, had recently been dumped by her boyfriend, Bobby. Well, Bobby had his reasons. Tina's parents could not digest the fact that their girl could fall in love with a black man. Anyway, Tina leaves home after finding out that Bobby was going around with some other girl. And where does Tina find herself? Of course, Interstate 49. But the highway was never safe for young women traveling alone. It still isn't. If a killer alien hybrid wouldn't do it, humans were enough to show Tina the gravity of the decision she had taken. Meanwhile, Naylor and Walker continued their pursuit of the subject by car, with additional support by helicopter, checking one or two other leads. Walker was starting to get a good idea just how weird this case was going to be. During the course of their drive, they see smoke coming out from a distance, and as they go and investigate, they find a car bursting into flames and turned upside down. It seemed as if Cal wanted to stage a scene where it looked like he died in the crash. You see, Sill had also done so in the movie. Anyway, Cal picks up a woman from a bar and the two of them drive off, but Cal soon detects that this woman cannot bear his child, so he leaves her right there and moves on to find his next victim. On the way, he steals another car, a sexy red sports car, by knocking its owner down and damn near breaking his arm. It wasn't before long that Cal managed to find Tina, the young girl who had just left her house recently. She was looking to hitchhike, and Cal presented himself just at the right instant. Little did Tina know that this person could become her doom. Cal takes her to a secluded area where he turns into his real form before trying to mate with Tina. However, the young girl manages to escape with her life. Of course, Cal follows her. To Tina's good luck, Walker and Naylor arrive at the scene too, and Naylor opens fire at Cal, distracting him from Tina. But Cal manages to run away and jump over a cliff and into the river flowing below. The issue ends with Walker comforting Tina, but Cal's threat was still lurking around. Issue 3. Now, Issue 3 goes pretty off track. We start with a couple, Glenda and Tommy. So they had been vacationing, probably in Las Vegas. On one of those days, Tommy rushes to an elevator that was about to shut, and inside was one man, Samuel. Tommy says that his luck was not bad after all, and the two of them talk about luck and other stuff, and that there's really nothing such as luck, but only opportunities, both good and bad. Just as the doors were about to be shut again, another man tried to enter the elevator. This was a man named Leonard, aka Lenny, and he was pointing a gun at Samuel. So Leonard worked for a mafia, only known in the story as Red, and apparently Red had many men. I mean, they make it abundantly clear through the course of the story. Nevertheless, Samuel had done something to upset Red, and Lenny was there to disperse the punishment. Of course, Lenny shoots Samuel, who fell to the ground, but he wasn't yet dead. Lenny turned to Tommy, who was there by chance. In fact, Lenny asks Tommy if he was one of the innocent-type bystanders and was prepared to leave no loose ends. But just then, Samuel shoots Lenny. Before dying, Samuel tells Tommy, "Young man, I have just some of what you would call bad luck. In my bag is what I would call an opportunity for you." And Samuel presents Tommy with a bag full of diamonds. Of course, Tommy takes the opportunity and flees with the diamonds before meeting Glenda. The two of them hit the road and head for their home in New Orleans to meet someone named Steve, who would help them cash out the diamonds. I'm sure all of this just doesn't sound like a Species story, but not so quick. So Tommy turns on the radio and hears Dr. Walker speaking on air. She goes, "There's the potential of a serious outbreak of an as-yet undetermined virus. Authorities have established a blockage within a 50-mile radius around Red River, Louisiana. We ask the public's cooperation and apologize in advance for any inconvenience." So no one was getting in or out. Tommy figures that they had to lay low for a while, and they stop at a diner to discuss it further. Now, Glenda was visibly upset about the whole thing. They were looking over one shoulder for the police and the other for the men of Red. Glenda wasn't sure what made her more nervous, the fact of possibly being hunted or the fact that Tommy now had a gun. While Glenda and Tommy spoke to each other about what to do, two important characters present themselves. The first was a fat cowboy with a fedora hat, and the second was a man in a trench coat who looked like one of these spy people. It was evident that both these men were interested in Tommy and Glenda, although they didn't approach the couple directly. But as soon as Tommy discovers the trench coat guy, he asks Glenda to get the car around back. Some time passes, and she does not return, making Tommy worry. A little while later, the waitress comes to Tommy with a note, which read, "Lucky Inn, room 13. Bring Red's stuff." Of course, Glenda had been kidnapped. Tommy makes a run for his car, and as he tries to drive away, he gets shot at by the trenchcoat guy. Yet he manages to escape. As he was instructed, Tommy arrives at room 13, only to find the door unlocked. He enters and finds the fat cowboy with the fedora, with Glenda lying in the bed, tied up. The man asks Tommy to hand the gun over to him, and Tommy reaches out to get the gun, not to give it to the man, but to shoot him down. Somehow, people don't seem to die in the comic with just one bullet, like one of those 90s Bollywood movies. Nevertheless, the man shoots back at Tommy. Meanwhile, Glenda manages to escape from the room in the chaos and enters this other room. Of course, the man follows her. However, he ends up pretty dead. Now this guy, this mysterious savior of our girl Glenda, was none other than Cal. Meanwhile, our spy dude enters room 13 and finds Tommy dead. You see, he was on the hunt for Cal and worked for the government. Just like Walker and Naylor, even this guy was checking out any leads, and he was after Tommy because Cal's description matched Tommy's. Upon finding Tommy dead, he calls in and reports it. However, just about then, he gets thrown down by a bike-borne Cal with Glenda riding pillion, presumably kidnapped, and that's where issue 3 ends. Issue 4. Now, the fourth issue starts with an unfortunate scene. So the issue introduces Dr. Jean Louise Diana, a 43-year-old mother of two. After some useless information about her children and how they live with a hired guardian because of Diana's profession, etc., the comic dives into what she was investigating. Well, she was observing and researching the latest victim of Cal. She found an abundance of seminal fluid, sperm-like forms. Unlike human sperm, which dies after a certain duration or drop in temperature, this sperm remains motile and active for days. The vitality of the specimen is unusual given the estimated time of death. There's this, along with the evidence of a sexual assault, the characteristic contusions, lacerations, and abrasions, including the tearing and destruction of genital and reproductive tissues, all in a manner consistent with the prior 15 cases. There were, however, significant deviations from the prior injury patterns. The current victim's name is, of course, Glenda Ross. She was last seen alive leaving the scene of a double homicide at the Lucky Inn Motel, but we know that. But what we don't know is that her body was found around 11 hours and 22 minutes after she was last seen. She was hidden beneath an uprooted road sign approximately 12 feet on the southern shoulder of Route 102, some 27 miles from the motel. And given the incredulous descriptions of the motorcycle's driver, it could only be Cal, which was further confirmed by the autopsy and the alien sperm found inside her. There were more important pieces of observations. So, as in all prior victims, the struggle with the assailant caused extensive defensive wounds, but this is the first case with physical rather than trace evidence of having caused injury to her assailant. You see, the fingernails, teeth, and debris surrounding Glenda's body revealed fragments of a soft, puppy material mixed with as-yet unidentified chitinous fragments. Another significant deviation from all prior cases is the fact that this victim, that is Glenda, was pregnant. All prior victims were fertile, but never pregnant. Furthermore, there was evidence that the sperm had attacked the unborn child she was carrying. Meanwhile, we see Cal in his true form, weakened and tired. It was as if he was going to die soon. After conducting her research on Glenda's deceased body, Dr. Diana returns to her office to make a few calls, and one of them was to Dr. Baker. I mean Dr. Laura Baker, the molecular biologist from the first movie who survived the initial encounter with Syl, the female counterpart of Cal. In the current case, Dr. Baker was serving as a scientific consultant. The conversation with Baker was rather unremarkable and was mostly an exchange of data, stuff like analysis of samples, the kind of proteins that made the protective exoskeleton of Cal and Syl, etc. But Baker warns Diana about keeping her children in the city and suggests that she send them away for a while. Next, she calls Naylor. Meanwhile, Cal killed a lady and her dog in cold blood, and back at the lab, Naylor joins Diana. So according to her further observations, accompanying the increase of matter clawed from her assistant was over 60 cubic centimeters of male ejaculate, far exceeding that in all previous victims. The curious part was that though the victim was neither young nor fertile, Cal proceeded with his act. Despite the damage of the abdominal area, there was clear evidence of prior surgery in the lower pelvic area, the lack of uterus, and the sutured blind pocket at the apex of the vagina. She could not conceive children. Diana tells Naylor that after her conversations with Dr. Walker and Dr. Baker, Diana concluded that Cal was becoming increasingly desperate to reproduce. After attacking 15 fertile young women of similar age and physical nature, who, apart from the inherent frailty of the human reproductive organs, in contrast with the assailant's anatomy, were ideal subjects for procreation, he assaulted a woman who could not conceive children. There's also the overabundance of sperm, as if that might compensate. Then she goes on to show Naylor the chunk of meat that Glenda had torn off Cal. She says Glenda tore it away from her assailant in greater quantities than the previous two cases. Prior to Glenda, the samples from the fingernails of the victims was minuscule. The cells were alive, at least as of now, and for the next few hours, Dr. Diana concluded that Cal was literally decomposing, like a male salmon after spawning. The spent male salmon actually disintegrates alive after mating. Diana believed that this is what was happening to Cal too. Syl needed human sperm to reproduce. Her biology could work with human semen to replicate herself, but Cal had failed to reproduce, and he knew his days were numbered. So he was getting desperate and was in pain. Meanwhile, Cal's desperate rampage continued, and as he attacked more women, they all fought back. Although these women died, they managed to do some real damage to Cal. In fact, one of them even severed his arms. All the dead women and Cal's remains were brought to the lab so that Dr. Diana could study them. She concludes that the assailants' remains were noticeably desiccated, much more brittle than those found at prior crime scenes, which indicated further dramatic disintegration of the living tissues. In Cal's final victim, a woman of almost 270 pounds, there was some movement. As Dr. Diana tried to cut open the thorax to see what was going on, a creature burst open the small cavity to reveal its alien hand. It seemed like a younger version of Cal, who was emerging from a stolen womb, as if it had given itself a rebirth. Dr. Diana knew every carnal detail of Cal's intentions, yet she did not flinch or bolt from the room. The creature lunged towards her, but fell to the floor, its flight cut short, and disintegrated into a mess of alien blood and bones. And the comic ends with Naylor asking Dr. Diana to preserve the samples in the hope that someday these materials could be put to good and more efficient use. Marvelous verdict. I'll be honest, there's really not a lot of good things I can say about this comic. It totally forgets a few things in the story. For instance, Cal initially manages to make a baby with a stripper, and although the baby dies soon after, it was something Cal fathered. However, by the fourth issue, they say that Cal never reproduced, and hence he was so desperate. The story started out fine, and I liked the bit where someone else also received the alien transmission with the alien hybrid recipe. But apart from that, the writing is just a bit too all over the place. I mean, what was the need to spend an entire issue on Tommy and Glenda's subplot? Like, why? But hey, that's just me. Let me know in the comments what you thought about it. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.